Maybe it's their lost expression, the look of confusion in their eyes, or maybe it's something else, a subtle sense that they need help. You've seen them, haven't you? In a moment, you could choose to pass by or make a small decision that might change both of your lives. What if, in that moment, you decided to help, and that one kind act would set the stage for something so unexpected, so extraordinary, that you would never see the world or that person the same again? That's what happened to Emily, a young woman from a small town, living the kind of life that blends in with the ordinary hustle of city life. She didn't expect anything to be out of the ordinary that morning as she stepped into her new job interview, feeling the usual mix of nerves and excitement. But life, as it tends to do, had a way of throwing a curveball, something so surreal that it defied all logic and left her questioning reality. You won't believe how Emily's life took a dramatic turn, all because of a split-second decision to help a lost tourist. Now, I know what you're thinking. What's so special about helping someone? It's just a simple act of kindness, right? But what if that act of kindness set in motion a chain of events so unexpected, so tangled with fate, that it would defy everything Emily thought she knew about coincidence? What if the stranger she helped that day turned out to be someone she would meet again under the most bizarre circumstances? Stick with me, and I promise by the end of this video, you'll be at the edge of your seat, wondering if fate really exists or if it's all just a series of unbelievable coincidences. Now, don't scroll away. I'm going to tell you how this story unfolded, but I need you to really pay attention, because this isn't just some ordinary tale. This is a story about destiny, second chances, and the strange ways the world works. You're not just going to hear about what happened to Emily, you're going to experience it with her. And by the end, when all the pieces of this story come together, you'll realize that sometimes the most unexpected encounters have the power to alter the course of your life in ways you can't even imagine. The first chapter of this story begins with Emily walking through the busy streets of New York City. She was running a little late for her interview, nothing unusual for anyone who's been in a rush before. She was thinking about how important this opportunity was for her career. It had taken months to land the interview with one of the city's most prestigious firms, and she was determined not to mess it up. But then, as she was hurrying through the crowd, she saw him. A man who clearly didn't belong. His clothes were out of place, and his confusion was obvious. He was a tourist, lost, with a map in hand, looking completely out of his element in a city as big and fast-paced as New York. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Emily's interview? Well, let me tell you, this lost tourist was the key to unlocking a mystery neither Emily nor he could have ever imagined. It was just supposed to be a simple gesture. A momentary kindness. Emily, with her natural inclination to help, approached him. She could have just pointed him in the right direction and walked away. But she didn't. Instead, she took a few extra minutes to guide him, to talk to him, and to make sure he felt a little less lost in the sea of towering skyscrapers and fast-moving crowds. And then, after the help was given, they parted ways. She had no idea then that this one act of kindness would be the start of something so crazy that she would never see the world the same way again. The encounter seemed completely random, and that's the beauty of it. Life works in strange, unpredictable ways. We meet people by accident, by chance, and sometimes, just sometimes, those fleeting moments turn into something far bigger. Fast forward to the next chapter of Emily's life, just a few hours later. She's sitting in that interview room, doing everything she can to stay calm and focused. Her mind is racing as the questions come in fast and furious. This is the moment she's been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. She's prepared for months, but even the best preparation can't ease the nerves. Then, the door opens. And guess who walks in? It's the same man, the lost tourist she helped earlier that day. Only this time, he's not lost. He's not a stranger anymore. He's the hiring manager for the company Emily's been trying to get into. He doesn't recognize her at first, but Emily, as the realization dawns on her, freezes. Could it be? What were the odds that the very person she had helped just hours ago would be the one deciding her fate today? How was it possible that the universe had connected these two people in such an inexplicable way? This is where the real mystery begins, and I want you to think for a moment about what you would do in Emily's shoes. What if the person you had helped earlier, someone you thought was a total stranger, turned out to hold the key to your future? Would you be calm and collected, or would you panic? What would you say? What would you do? It's a situation where everything you thought you knew could turn upside down in an instant. But before you jump ahead and start thinking about what happens next, let me tell you that what Emily faces in that room is more than just an awkward coincidence. The strange connection between them is about to become even more tangled. Emily, feeling the weight of this bizarre twist of fate, knows she can't ignore the situation. But should she confront the man? Should she tell him that she helped him earlier? Would that affect her chances? Or should she keep quiet and let the interview play out as if this was all just a normal day? As Emily tries to navigate this surreal encounter, she realizes that the line between fate and coincidence isn't as clear as it might seem. And the decisions she makes in this interview room could change the course of her life, not just professionally, but personally. The more she looks at him, the more the tension builds. Every moment feels loaded with potential. And as she tries to make sense of what's happening, she's also forced to confront her own fears, doubts, and desires. Because in the end, this encounter is more than just about a job, it's about understanding the strange, inexplicable ways the universe works, and how sometimes, it's the smallest moments that have the power to change everything. But I'm not going to spoil everything for you right now. Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning. The twists and turns are just getting started, and trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. Because Emily is about to find out that fate has a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. And once this story unfolds, you'll be left questioning whether anything in life is truly random, or if everything happens for a reason. So don't go anywhere. You'll get the full answer soon, and I promise, it's one you won't forget. As Emily sat in that interview room, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders, her mind raced back through the events of the past few weeks. It wasn't just the interview that had her on edge, it was everything that had led her to this point. Moving to New York City, the pressure of starting over, the expectations she had for herself, the tension in her chest wasn't just from nerves about the job. It was the culmination of everything she had been grappling with since she left her quiet hometown, looking for something bigger, something more fulfilling. The city had promised endless possibilities, yet it had also left her feeling more lost than ever, unsure of whether she had made the right decision. Emily had always been a bit of a dreamer. She had come to New York with aspirations of carving out a successful career in finance, a field she'd worked hard to break into during her final years at university. But the reality had been much harder to swallow. The competition was fierce, the hours long, and the constant pressure to succeed had her questioning if she was cut out for this life. She had tried to stay connected with friends back home, but as the weeks turned into months, those relationships had begun to fade into the background. It was hard to keep in touch when everything in her life was moving at such a fast pace. Her friends didn't quite understand why she had left everything behind to chase a dream that seemed more and more out of reach. And then there was her family. Her parents were proud of her, but also concerned. They had supported her decision to move to the city, but there were quiet conversations behind her back, the kind that she could hear when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Her mom had texted her the other day asking if she was really happy in New York, and her dad had dropped off a care package without any explanation. She knew they were worried, but she also knew they wanted her to make it on her own. They believed in her potential, but Emily couldn't help feeling the weight of their hopes on her shoulders. The pressure of living up to those expectations was suffocating, and as she prepared for this job interview, she felt the burden more than ever. She needed this job. Not just for the financial security, but to prove to herself, and to everyone back home, that she could make it in a city that had no room for the faint of heart. But now, with the mysterious appearance of the man she had helped earlier that day, everything was shifting in ways she couldn't quite control. She was snapped back to reality as the man, her interviewer, sat down across from her, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His demeanor was calm, almost too calm, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was he being polite, or was there something more beneath the surface? She tried to focus, reminding herself that she had prepared for this moment, but her mind kept drifting back to that lost tourist. The timing couldn't have been a coincidence. He had to have known about the interview, didn't he? Or maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just a random twist of fate, but the fact that he had arrived here, of all places, couldn't be ignored. The man's name, she learned, was Jack Thompson, and he was one of the senior partners at the firm. He was well-spoken, confident, and seemed to know exactly what he wanted from his candidates. But as they delved into the usual questions, her background, her qualifications, why she wanted the job, Emily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. There was an intensity behind his gaze that unnerved her, a sharpness to his questions that made her wonder if he knew more about her than he let on. At one point, he asked about her experience volunteering, something Emily had done back in her college days, working at local shelters and helping at community events. It was a harmless question, but the way he phrased it, almost as if he were testing her, made her pause. Was he asking because he was genuinely interested, or because he knew something about her past? For a brief moment, Emily considered the possibility that this entire interview might be a setup. A few weeks ago, she had received a strange email, one that she had dismissed as spam. It was an anonymous message, with no subject, just a cryptic line, "You'll see him again." She had laughed it off, assuming it was some kind of prank or a marketing scheme gone wrong. But now, sitting across from Jack, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. The universe, it seemed, had a way of putting things in her path for a reason. Was she being led to this moment? And if so, why? Jack leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. He studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, and then he spoke, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've heard you're good at solving problems, Emily. You've been told that, haven't you?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. And it sent a chill down her spine. Her mind scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of test? A psychological game? Was Jack just playing with her, or was he trying to gauge how she would react under pressure? She couldn't tell. It was all too much. She tried to focus, to push her thoughts back to the interview, but the unease in her stomach only grew stronger. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't trust him." Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly glanced at Jack, but he didn't seem to notice. How did someone know to send her that message? Was it a coincidence? Or was someone out there pulling strings, watching her every move? She didn't have time to dwell on it, as Jack continued talking about the company's work culture and expectations, but her mind was racing. Was he involved in whatever was happening? Was this all part of a bigger puzzle she wasn't seeing? And then, without warning, Jack smiled, his expression softening. It was a completely different look, one that made him seem human again, but the shift was jarring. Emily didn't know what to make of it. Was this a calculated move? Was it part of his plan to throw her off balance? It was all starting to feel like a game. But who was the player? And what was the end goal? Was it just a job interview, or was something else at stake? With every passing second, the tension in the room grew, and Emily knew that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. She had walked into this interview thinking it would be the beginning of a new chapter, but now, she wasn't so sure. Something deeper, something darker, was at play here, and she was beginning to suspect that she had unwittingly become part of it. As the interview continued, Emily's mind buzzed with the weight of her growing suspicions. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the feeling that something wasn't right, that the pieces of the puzzle she had started to put together were slipping through her fingers, just out of reach. But she couldn't stop herself from pushing forward, from trying to make sense of it all. It was as if she was in the middle of a maze, with no clear path, no map to guide her, just dead ends and shadows lurking at every turn. After the interview, when Emily left the building, she had to force herself to breathe deeply. The air outside felt heavy, like a storm was on the horizon. Her phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number, "Stay away from him. It's not worth it." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Who was sending these texts? Why were they so desperate for her to stop? The idea that someone out there knew about her encounter with Jack, about her thoughts, her every move, made her feel more vulnerable than she'd ever been. She had a few hours before she needed to meet up with a friend, so she decided to take a walk to clear her head. But as she passed the little cafe on the corner, something caught her eye. It was a man she didn't recognize, standing near a bench, talking to someone on the phone. She wasn't sure why, but the sight of him made her uneasy. He seemed to be watching her, his gaze too deliberate, too focused. She quickened her pace, her thoughts racing again, wondering if he knew something. Was he connected to Jack? Was this part of some larger web she didn't yet understand? When she finally reached the park, she sat down on a bench and pulled out her phone to check her messages. Her heart dropped as she saw that something had changed. The text messages she had saved from the unknown number, the ones that had been guiding her, warning her, were gone. Every last one of them. It was as if they had never existed at all. She swiped through her inbox frantically, double-checking, but they were nowhere to be found. The panic started to rise in her chest. Had someone deleted them? Had they been watching her, waiting for the moment to erase any evidence she had of this strange, growing conspiracy? Her hands trembled as she called her friend, Sarah, who had been her closest ally since she'd moved to New York. Sarah picked up almost immediately, her voice warm but distracted. "Hey, what's up?" she asked. "I need you to listen to me," Emily said, her voice urgent. "I think something's happening. Something bigger than I expected. I need your help." Sarah's tone shifted instantly, a mix of concern and curiosity creeping into her voice. "What do you mean? Is everything okay? You sound off." Emily hesitated. She didn't want to sound paranoid, but the truth was, everything felt off. The texts, the mysterious messages, the strange encounter with Jack, it all added up to something she couldn't quite grasp, but she knew it was dangerous. "I don't know if I'm overthinking things, but something's wrong. Jack, the guy from the interview, he's connected to something. I can't explain it, but there's something I'm not seeing, and I think I'm being watched." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. "Emily, you need to be careful. Maybe this is all just a coincidence. It's a tough city, and people can seem more suspicious than they really are. But if you feel like something's off, maybe it's time to let it go. Don't dig any deeper." Emily's heart sank. She had expected Sarah to be supportive, to help her figure this out, but instead, Sarah's warning felt like a push to back away. "What do you mean, let it go?" Emily asked, her voice rising. "This isn't just about a job interview anymore. There's something more at play here. I feel like I'm missing a piece of the puzzle." "I'm just saying," Sarah continued, her voice softer now, "some things are better left alone. I don't want to see you get hurt. You don't know who you're dealing with." The conversation ended there, with Emily feeling a mixture of confusion and dread. Why had Sarah sounded so distant? Why had she warned her so strongly to back off? Had she been so caught up in the mystery that she hadn't noticed how strange everything had become? And why, out of nowhere, had her best friend seemed so wary? She tried to shake off the feeling, but the unease lingered. Maybe Sarah was right, maybe it was all in her head. After all, she had just moved to a new city, everything was unfamiliar, and her nerves were already on edge. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the sense that something wasn't right. The pieces were scattered, out of order, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if there was a hidden truth, a buried secret that no one wanted her to uncover. The next day, Emily decided to take action. She needed answers, and she wasn't about to let fear or doubt stop her from finding the truth. She started by retracing her steps, going back to the cafe where she had seen the mysterious man. Maybe there was something she had missed, some clue she had overlooked. As she walked past the bench, she noticed something odd, a small scrap of paper, half hidden under a discarded coffee cup. Curious, she bent down and picked it up. The paper was wrinkled, the ink slightly smudged, but she could make out a few words. "Don't trust him. He's not who he says he is." Her heart raced. Who had left this note? Was it a warning? And if so, who was the he they were talking about? Was it Jack? Had someone been following her, watching her every move? The thought made her skin crawl. She tucked the note into her pocket, her mind spinning with possibilities. But just as she was about to head back to her apartment, something stopped her in her tracks. The man she had seen earlier, the one who had been talking on the phone outside the cafe, was standing on the other side of the street, watching her. This time, though, he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, her face partially obscured by the brim of a hat, but Emily could tell she was looking directly at her. Before Emily could process what was happening, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd, the woman following close behind. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Who were they? And why were they watching her? Were they part of something bigger? Was this all connected to Jack? With every step Emily took, the web of uncertainty grew tighter, and she realized that she was now in deeper than ever before. There was no turning back, no easy way out. Someone, somewhere, was determined to keep her from uncovering the truth. And as she looked around, she couldn't help but wonder just how many people in her life, her friends, her colleagues, even her own family, were involved in this web of secrets, lies, and hidden motives. The questions piled up faster than she could answer them, and just as she thought she might find a way to make sense of it all, her phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unfamiliar number. Stop. You don't want to know what happens next. But it was already too late. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that the truth she was looking for might be far darker than she ever imagined. And now, with no way of knowing who to trust, Emily had no choice but to keep going, even if it meant risking everything. As Emily stood frozen on the street, staring at her phone, the weight of the message settled heavily in her chest. Stop. You don't want to know what happens next. It felt like a threat, a final warning to back off. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the path she was on could lead to something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. The pieces of the puzzle she was desperately trying to fit together only seemed to multiply, each one revealing new layers of mystery and uncertainty. It was as if someone or something was watching her, controlling the narrative, pushing her closer to a truth she wasn't ready to confront. But it wasn't just Emily who was caught in the web of strange events. Across town, her best friend Sarah had begun receiving odd messages too. Emily had pushed her earlier, but now, after everything that had happened to her, she couldn't help but wonder if Sarah had also been a part of something she wasn't seeing. The messages Sarah was getting were eerily similar to the ones Emily had received, cryptic, ominous, and warning her to stay away from the investigation. This isn't just for you, the latest text Sarah received said. You don't know who you're dealing with. Sarah had called Emily earlier that day, but when Emily answered, the conversation felt off. It was almost as though Sarah was hiding something more than just concern for her safety. And when Emily tried to ask about the strange text, Sarah quickly changed the subject, brushing it off as a glitch or prank. Emily wasn't convinced. She knew Sarah too well. This wasn't a coincidence. The moment she hung up the phone after their brief exchange, Emily had felt a strange shift in her gut, the kind of feeling that told her that Sarah, the one person she'd trusted most in this city, might not be as trustworthy as she had once believed. Emily didn't want to believe it, she couldn't, but the connection between Sarah and these mysterious events was undeniable. The messages. The strange warnings. The way Sarah had hesitated when she told Emily to stop digging. Was Sarah involved in all of this? Was she part of the reason why this mystery was unfolding in such a strange, twisted way? Desperate for answers, Emily turned to the only person she felt she could trust now, a former colleague from her first job in the city, Mark. He had always been a steady presence in her life, a quiet, methodical person who worked as a private investigator before he joined the firm she was now applying to. She had always known he had connections, that his past was filled with things he didn't talk about, things that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone with a different life. Mark had always kept a low profile, staying under the radar, but Emily had seen his investigative skills up close, and she knew he would be able to help her figure out what was really happening. When she met him at the bar later that evening, she was looking for clarity, for someone to give her the answers she had been searching for. But what she got instead only added to the confusion. Mark had told her that he couldn't help her anymore, that this was bigger than either of them. He told her that it wasn't just about Jack or the firm. He said that everything connected to her situation, to what was happening with Sarah and with Jack, went deeper than they both realized. Emily felt a pit form in her stomach as Mark's words sank in. I can't go any further, he said, his voice strained, almost as if he were afraid of being overheard. You don't know the full story, Emily. Trust me. There are things happening right now that you're better off staying out of. That was when Emily noticed something strange in Mark's expression, something almost like fear. She had always seen him as unshakable, the kind of person who could handle anything. But now, there was an edge to him, a tension that made Emily feel like he was hiding something. She asked him directly, What aren't you telling me, Mark? But he shook his head, standing up abruptly, and left before she could press him further. The conversation left her feeling more confused than ever. The idea that Mark, someone she had trusted and relied on, might be hiding something from her was unsettling. The next day, Emily decided to confront Sarah again. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Sarah was at the center of all of this. But when she went to Sarah's apartment, something was different. Sarah was acting strange, avoiding eye contact, almost jittery. And when Emily mentioned the warning she had received, Sarah's face grew pale. It was a look of fear, a look that Emily had never seen before. Sarah stammered for a moment, and then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Just let it go, Emily. Please. You're in over your head." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Something wasn't adding up. Emily had known Sarah for years, but never had she seen her friend so desperate, so unwilling to share what was going on. Was Sarah afraid for Emily? Or was she afraid of something else? Emily's head spun with possibilities. Was Sarah part of some greater conspiracy? Was she involved in whatever dark forces had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes? Or had Sarah, like Mark, simply gotten caught up in something too dangerous to handle? Just as Emily was about to press her for answers, Sarah's phone rang, and she excused herself to answer. Emily stood there, feeling like an intruder in her own friend's life, unsure of what to do next. She tried to listen in, but Sarah spoke quietly, her voice shaking as she spoke to someone on the other end. Emily couldn't make out the words, but the fear in Sarah's voice was undeniable. Who was she talking to? Was it someone connected to Jack? To the messages? Was Sarah involved in something much darker than Emily could have ever imagined? As Sarah hung up the phone, she turned back to Emily, her expression strained. "I can't talk about this," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. You need to stop." The chill in her words sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She knew then that Sarah was more involved in this than she had led on. And whatever was happening, whatever had been set into motion the moment she decided to help that lost tourist, was spiraling out of control. With her trust in Sarah crumbling, Emily's sense of isolation deepened. No one around her seemed to be what they appeared to be. Every conversation felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Was Mark hiding something from her because he was scared? Was Sarah keeping secrets for her own protection, or because she was part of something far more dangerous? And how did Jack fit into all of this? Every answer only led to more questions, and with each new clue, the stakes grew higher. Emily knew one thing for certain: the deeper she went, the more she uncovered, the more she realized she wasn't just up against a strange set of coincidences. There were forces at work here, people pulling strings, and the more she dug, the more she felt the walls closing in. The truth was out there, but it was buried under layers of deception, and whoever was behind all of this didn't want her to find it. Just as Emily started to make her way out of Sarah's apartment, she glanced at her phone one last time. A new message had come through, this one from the same unknown number. It read, "It's too late. They're already watching." Emily froze in place, her breath catching in her throat. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was in over her head, and the people around her, even the ones she thought she could trust, were part of something much darker than she could have ever imagined. And there was no way out now. The following morning, Emily woke with a feeling of dread in her gut, as though she were teetering on the edge of something she couldn't quite understand, something she couldn't escape. She had barely slept the night before, her thoughts racing through the events that had unfolded in the past few days. Her mind felt consumed by the growing web of secrets, and the weight of every unanswered question seemed to press down on her chest. Even the air in her apartment felt thick, like it was closing in on her, suffocating her. She tried to focus on the mundane, getting ready for her interview later that morning, making a cup of coffee, but every action felt mechanical, as though she were going through the motions of a life that no longer felt like her own. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. Another message from the unknown number, this time even more cryptic than before: "You think you're safe. You're not." The words hit her like a slap across the face. The sender didn't even need to identify themselves anymore. Whoever was behind these messages seemed to think they had control. And maybe, Emily thought, They did. After all, she had no idea how deep she was already involved. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that every move she made was being tracked. She glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the street was empty, as it usually was on a quiet Thursday morning. Yet, the unease didn't dissipate. It only grew. She left her apartment a little after 9, trying to push the fear down deep inside of her. There was still too much to figure out, too many loose ends. As she walked to the subway station, her footsteps seemed to echo in her ears. Everything around her felt surreal, as though she were in a dream that she couldn't wake up from. She tried to focus on her surroundings, on the bustle of the city, the street vendors, the hurried commuters, the distant sound of a car horn, but nothing felt real anymore. Every person she passed seemed to be a potential threat, and every glance sent her heart racing. She couldn't shake the sensation that someone, somewhere, was following her. By the time she arrived at the subway station, she was already on edge. The underground air felt oppressive, stifling, as though the walls were closing in around her. She scanned the platform, looking for any sign of the man she had seen earlier, the one who had been watching her in the cafe. But there was no one there who stood out. Still, her gut told her something was wrong. She'd barely stepped off the platform when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate steps that didn't belong in the busy flow of people hurrying to catch their trains. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding harder with each step. She could feel their presence, the weight of eyes on her, the growing sense that she was being hunted. She glanced over her shoulder, her breath catching in her throat when she saw a figure following her, a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by the collar, just a few paces behind. Emily's stomach lurched. Her first instinct was to run, but where could she go? She was in a crowded subway station, surrounded by hundreds of people, and yet she felt entirely alone. Her phone buzzed again, another message, turn around. She didn't need to. She already knew the truth. Whoever was watching her, whoever had been pulling the strings all along, was now closing in. She didn't wait for the man to get any closer. With a surge of adrenaline, she broke into a sprint, weaving through the crowds, her feet barely touching the ground. She could hear his footsteps behind her, matching her pace, getting closer, closer. Her mind raced, she couldn't outrun him in the underground. She had to make it to the surface, where she could find help, where she could lose him in the throngs of people. But as she reached the escalator, she felt his hand grip her shoulder, spinning her around with brutal force. Before she could react, the world went black. Emily woke up in a dimly lit room, disoriented, her head throbbing. It took a few seconds for her eyes to adjust to the low light, and when they did, she realized with a jolt that she was no longer in the subway. She was lying on a hard surface, her hands bound tightly behind her. Panic surged through her chest. She tried to move, to pull at the ropes, but they only tightened. The air smelled stale, like dust and old wood. The walls were bare, save for a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. She tried to steady her breath, her heart pounding in her chest, but the overwhelming fear of being trapped, of being at the mercy of whoever had brought her here, made it impossible to think clearly. Her mind raced through everything that had happened in the past week. The mysterious messages, the strange encounters, the sense of being watched. Was this the end of the road for her? Had she gone too far, uncovered too much? Her body trembled as she thought of Sarah, of Mark, of Jack. Had they been involved in this all along? Had they been lying to her? She tried to recall everything they had said, every detail they had left behind. But her memories were fragmented, like shattered glass, she couldn't put the pieces together. And then, through the haze of her panic, Emily heard something. A door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the small room. She held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible, hoping, praying that whoever had brought her here wouldn't notice her awake. But it was no use. The footsteps stopped just behind her, and she could feel the presence of someone standing there, just out of sight. A deep voice, cold and measured, spoke into the silence. "You shouldn't have come this far." The words sent a chill through her body, her skin prickling with terror. This wasn't a random encounter. Whoever was behind all of this, whoever had orchestrated everything, knew exactly who she was. And now, Emily realized with growing horror, she was no longer in control. She had crossed a line, one she couldn't uncross. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out, but there was nothing she could do. She had no idea where she was, no idea who was watching her, and no idea how to escape. As the voice continued, Emily felt the full weight of the situation crash down on her. Whoever had been pulling the strings from the shadows wasn't done with her yet. This wasn't just a warning. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. As the door slammed shut behind her, Emily felt the full extent of her isolation. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air growing colder. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare her, they were trying to break her. And in that moment, she realized the terrifying truth: she wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. And there was nowhere left to run. Emily's heart was still pounding in her chest when the door slammed shut, the harsh sound reverberating through the room like a death knell. Her mind swirled with questions, each one darker than the last. She had expected danger, had known on some level that she was walking into something far more sinister than she could comprehend. But what she hadn't anticipated, what she hadn't seen coming, was how everything she had uncovered, every piece of the puzzle, might have been a distraction, a carefully orchestrated set of misdirections that kept her chasing after shadows, unknowingly walking into a trap she couldn't escape. She tried to steady her breath, pushing against the fear that threatened to swallow her whole. But just as her pulse began to slow, as the panic started to recede into the background of her thoughts, the sound of footsteps echoed once again in the quiet room. This time, however, the steps were different. They were familiar, too familiar. Emily's gut clenched as a figure stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light. It was Mark. She blinked, not trusting her own eyes. The same Mark who had told her to stay away, who had warned her not to dig any deeper, was standing in front of her, his face expressionless, cold. The Mark she had trusted, the one she thought might help her piece together the truth, was here, and in that moment, everything she thought she knew about this situation started to unravel. For a second, the world around her seemed to stop. How was it possible that Mark was involved in this? She had known him for years, had confided in him, had always believed that he was a steady, reliable person. And yet, here he was, standing in front of her in this cold, dark room, looking every bit like the person who had orchestrated her capture. A sick realization crawled through her veins: she had been played. She had been so caught up in the search for answers, so focused on the mysterious messages and the strange threats, that she hadn't even considered the possibility that Mark, the one person who seemed to have all the answers, might have been pulling the strings the entire time. "Why, Mark?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling with the weight of her disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me? All this time. You knew what was happening, didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers, the intensity in his gaze almost unnerving. It was as though he was studying her, calculating something in his mind. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "You were never supposed to get this far," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to get involved in this. But once you helped that tourist, once you made that choice, it was too late." The words didn't make sense to her. She had been following a trail, investigating Jack and the mysterious events that surrounded him. But now, Mark's cryptic explanation seemed to turn everything she thought she knew on its head. She had been the one who decided to help a lost tourist. She had been the one to get involved. And yet, the more Mark spoke, the clearer it became that her role in all of this had been manipulated from the very beginning. "What do you mean?" Emily's voice cracked, a mix of anger and confusion flooding her chest. "Why was I even involved in the first place? Why not just leave me out of it? Why bring me into all of this, if you already knew?" Mark sighed, his gaze softening for a moment, as though he were regretful of something. But then, just as quickly, the coldness returned. "Because you were the perfect person to distract them," he said, his words hitting Emily like a slap. "You were never supposed to get caught up in this mess, but you were the ideal pawn in a much bigger game. You were always going to uncover things, but just enough to keep you questioning, just enough to make you think you were close to the truth. But you weren't, Emily. You weren't even close." Her mind raced. A pawn. She had been nothing more than a distraction in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The realization began to dawn on her, slow and suffocating. The messages, the warnings, the strange sense of being watched, they had all been part of the plan. Mark had been watching her, guiding her toward a false conclusion, keeping her just close enough to the edge of the mystery to make her believe she could solve it, but never allowing her to reach the core of the truth. She had been a player in someone else's game, and now she was paying the price. But just as the darkness of this revelation settled over her, Mark did something unexpected. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out to untie the ropes that bound her wrists. Emily flinched, instinctively pulling away, but Mark didn't move any closer. Instead, his expression shifted, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than cold calculation in his eyes, something like regret, maybe even fear. "They're coming for you, Emily," he whispered. "And they won't stop until they find you." She froze, the weight of his words sinking in. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. But before Mark could respond, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the room, followed by a series of muffled voices. Someone else was coming. Mark's face darkened. "It's too late," he said, his voice now tinged with panic. "You should have stayed away. I never wanted this for you, but now there's no turning back." Emily's breath hitched in her throat as the reality of her situation came crashing down around her. She had thought she was on the verge of discovering the truth, of unraveling a mystery that had been carefully crafted just for her. But now, she understood, the entire investigation had been a trap from the beginning, and the person she had trusted most was the one who had set it in motion. Her attempts to seek answers, to understand what was happening, had been manipulated every step of the way. And now, as the sound of footsteps drew nearer, Emily realized with gut-wrenching clarity that there was no escape. She was caught in the middle of something much darker than she could have ever imagined, and the people who had seemed like allies, people like Mark, were no longer who she thought they were. With every twist, the story she thought she was living had changed, and now, it felt like the very ground beneath her feet was slipping away. And in that moment, as the door creaked open once again, Emily understood that everything she had known was a lie. She had been part of a game she didn't understand, and the rules had just changed. As the door creaked open, Emily's heart seemed to stop in her chest. She didn't know what she expected to see, maybe more of the cold, calculated figures who had been watching her, or perhaps someone entirely new, someone who could explain the chaos that had spiraled out of control in the past week. But what stood in the doorway was even worse than she could have imagined. It was Sarah. Her best friend. The one person Emily had turned to for comfort when everything felt too overwhelming. But the look on Sarah's face was not one of relief or concern. No, it was something much darker, something Emily had never seen before. The room, already heavy with tension, seemed to close in on her as Sarah stepped inside, her eyes locking onto Emily's with a coldness that was almost unrecognizable. "I didn't think you'd make it this far," Sarah said, her voice flat, almost matter-of-fact. Emily's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a surprise. This was betrayal. And in that moment, everything she thought she understood about the people around her shattered. She had known Sarah for years, had laughed with her, confided in her, and yet, here she was, standing in the very heart of a nightmare that Emily could no longer escape from. "What the hell is going on, Sarah?" Emily's voice was raw, thick with disbelief and anger. "Why? Why are you here? Why are you doing this? I trusted you." Her words felt heavy in the air between them, but Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze still cold and calculating, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw something like pity flicker across her face. "I'm sorry, Emily," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but you don't understand. You never did. You've been chasing the wrong answers this whole time." Emily's mind whirled, trying to piece together the puzzle, but nothing made sense. Sarah, the person she had called a friend, had been behind this all along. Emily had trusted her with her fears, her questions, and her search for the truth, and now Sarah was the one who was pulling the strings in a game that had far higher stakes than Emily could have imagined. A chill ran through Emily's veins as she realized that Sarah wasn't just a bystander in this twisted situation, she was a player, an active participant in the web of deception that had ensnared her. "You've been watching me," Emily said, more to herself than to Sarah. "From the start. You've been orchestrating everything, haven't you? From the messages to the threats. It's all you, isn't it?" The weight of the truth hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Sarah's silence only confirmed Emily's worst fears. Sarah's lips parted, but before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Emily's pulse spiked again. It wasn't just Sarah. There were others involved. This wasn't a one-person operation. This was much bigger, much darker than she had realized. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. But Sarah didn't seem concerned. She simply raised a hand, signaling for Emily to stay quiet. "You're right," Sarah said quietly, her voice trembling just slightly. "I've been keeping things from you. But you don't understand the bigger picture. If you think this is about you, Emily, you're wrong. You're just a small part of it. Just a pawn in a game that's far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. Then why involve me at all?" Emily shot back, her heart racing as the tension between them thickened. "Why go through all this trouble? Why not just leave me out of it?" Sarah hesitated, and for a moment, Emily saw something flicker in her eyes, something akin to regret. "Because you were always meant to be part of it," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "It's not about what you can uncover, Emily. It's about what you can protect. And now you're caught in the middle of it." Emily's mind reeled. Protect? Protect from what? From whom? "What are you talking about, Sarah? Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings?" The questions came out in a rush, each one more frantic than the last, but Sarah just shook her head, her eyes clouding with sorrow. "I can't tell you that," Sarah said, almost apologetically. "You're too far in now. And if I tell you, it'll make everything worse. There's no way out of this, Emily. No safe way. We're all in this now, whether we like it or not." Emily's heart raced as the reality of Sarah's words sank in. There was no safe way out. The thought of it, of being trapped in a situation with no escape, was suffocating. But just as she was about to demand more answers, a voice suddenly came from the doorway behind Sarah. It was low and smooth, too calm for the chaos that had been unfolding. "She's right, you know." The man who stepped into the room was one Emily recognized instantly, Jack, the tourist she had helped weeks ago. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a split second, Emily felt a jolt of disbelief shoot through her. Jack. He was part of this, too? How could that be possible? She had tried to help him. She had trusted him. Jack. Emily's voice barely rose above a whisper, her mind struggling to piece everything together. "You. But I thought." Jack smiled faintly, almost pityingly, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. "You thought I was just some lost tourist, didn't you? That you were helping me out of the kindness of your heart. But the truth is, I've been watching you, too. You've been playing into our hands from the start, Emily. Everything, from the moment you helped me find my way, it was all part of the plan." Emily's heart thudded in her chest, her breath shallow. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was something far larger, far more complicated than she could have ever prepared for. And now, with Sarah and Jack standing in front of her, she had to make a choice that could either save her or doom her to whatever fate they had in store. Jack took a step closer, his tone now colder, more menacing. "You've been asking the wrong questions, Emily. It's not about who's behind this. It's about what happens next. You can either walk away now and keep your life, but you'll have to forget everything. Or you can stay and learn the truth. But know this, the truth might be worse than anything you can imagine. And once you know it, there's no going back." The ultimatum hung in the air, thick with unspoken consequences. Emily felt the weight of it pressing down on her. She could feel the walls closing in once again, the walls of a situation she no longer controlled. She had to decide now, safety or the truth. What was worth more? Her fear screamed at her to walk away, to protect herself, to find a way to escape. But something inside her, something deeper, stronger, urged her to push forward, to uncover what had been hidden all along, no matter the cost. But as the seconds ticked by, Emily realized that this wasn't just about her. This wasn't just about finding answers. This was about survival. And whatever choice she made would change everything. Emily's mind raced as the weight of Jack's ultimatum sank in. Her heart hammered against her chest like a drumbeat, every second feeling like it could be her last. There was no turning back now. Every thread she'd pulled, every question she'd asked, had led her to this moment, and yet, as she looked at the two people she had trusted most, she realized she had never been farther from the truth. The world she thought she knew was slipping away, and the conspiracy she had only just begun to uncover was much bigger, much darker than she could have imagined. The sound of the door slamming behind her echoed in her ears as Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "You have no idea, Emily. You think this is just about you, just about finding out who's been pulling the strings, but it's not. This goes far deeper than anything you can understand right now." Emily's head spun as Sarah's words echoed in her mind, trying to make sense of them, but it felt like the pieces of the puzzle kept shifting out of place, each one leading her further into a maze of lies. She looked from Sarah to Jack, the betrayal seeping into her bones, and the horrifying realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had been nothing more than a pawn in a game that was far more dangerous than she could have ever anticipated. They weren't just targeting her. They were targeting everyone she loved, everyone she had ever known. "They'll come for you, too, you know," Emily said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She didn't even know who she was speaking to anymore, Sarah or Jack, or maybe both of them. She didn't even know who she could trust, who was telling the truth. The fear that had been building inside her now exploded, threatening to consume her whole. "It's not just about me, is it? This isn't just about me finding answers. This is bigger than all of us. You're all involved in something dangerous, something that's going to ruin everything." Sarah's eyes flashed with something unreadable, her expression hardening. "You still don't get it, do you? You think this is just about some conspiracy against you, but it's not. This is about control. Power. And if you don't stop, if you don't walk away now, everything you've worked for, everyone you care about, will be destroyed." Emily's heart raced faster, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. Control. Power. She had been right all along, the strings she had been tugging at were not just part of some small-scale plot. This wasn't about a single person. It was about something much larger, a shadowy web of influence that spanned far beyond her small, isolated world. These were people with resources, connections, the kind of power that could destroy lives without leaving a trace. And now, she was entangled in it, whether she wanted to be or not. But the words she needed to say still wouldn't come. She was choking on the gravity of the situation, on the urgency to understand what had led her here. Why had she been dragged into this nightmare? Why were they targeting her? And then it hit her, the pieces, finally falling into place with sickening clarity. "You were never trying to protect me, were you, Sarah?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, but it felt like the most important question she could ask. "You were trying to control me, just like they've controlled everything else." For a split second, something flickered in Sarah's eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, a moment of hesitation. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by something colder, harder. "You should have stayed away, Emily. I warned you. You've already gone too far." Sarah's voice was sharp, commanding, and Emily realized in that moment just how deep this betrayal ran. She wasn't just involved in the conspiracy, she was a part of it. A key player, one who had been manipulating Emily all along. "Who's pulling the strings?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "Who is this really for? Who do they want me to hurt?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Emily saw the sheer weight of the decision Sarah was about to make. "It's bigger than you, Emily. It's bigger than both of us. I never wanted you to get caught in the crossfire, but now," she looked away, as if she couldn't bring herself to say the words, but the silence between them said everything Emily needed to know. This wasn't just about protecting someone from danger, it was about gaining control, making sure the right people stayed on top, no matter the cost. And Emily was just another obstacle to be removed. Emily's pulse quickened as she realized she was in too deep. The walls were closing in around her, and every step she'd taken had only made things worse. But just as she was about to ask more, Jack's voice interrupted, low and chilling. "It's not just Sarah, you know," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper but carrying an undeniable authority. Emily turned to him, her breath catching as he continued, "You've been playing this game, thinking it was just about you and the truth, but it's never been about that. There's more to this than you can possibly understand. And if you think we're the only ones involved, you're wrong." The words hung in the air like poison, and Emily's heart sank as she realized what he meant. There were more. More people behind this. More players, pulling strings from the shadows. And she had been nothing but a small piece of a much larger puzzle. "They're watching you, Emily. Right now," Jack said, his eyes cold and distant. "You think you're safe here, but you're not. They've known your every move, your every choice. And they've been letting you think you're in control. But now you're running out of time." His words hit her like a slap. Emily's mind raced, the weight of everything pressing down on her. This wasn't just about her safety. It was about everyone she had ever known. Everyone she loved. The people she had trusted. The whole time, they had been playing a game, and Emily had been the unwitting pawn, a piece moved around without ever understanding the stakes. And now, the game had shifted. There was no way out. She couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. The truth was there, hidden just beneath the surface, and it was far worse than she could have imagined. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "No more lies. No more games. I want to know everything." Jack and Sarah exchanged a look, one that made Emily's blood run cold. Whatever they were planning next, it was too late to stop. And for the first time in her life, Emily realized that the only thing standing between her and total destruction was her ability to outsmart the very people she had trusted the most. But as the door behind them creaked open again, and Emily realized there was no way out, she understood one thing for certain: the conspiracy was only just beginning. Emily stood in the dimly lit room, her breath shallow, her mind a chaotic whirlpool of questions and fragmented pieces of the puzzle that she had been desperately trying to put together for what felt like an eternity. The walls seemed to close in on her as she stood face to face with the one person she never thought she'd have to confront, Sarah. But it wasn't just Sarah anymore. The real face of the conspiracy was standing in front of her, and all of her worst fears were about to come true. The truth was finally within reach, just one final step, one last piece of the puzzle, and she would have all the answers. The room felt suffocating as the silence between them stretched, each second crawling by with unbearable tension. She had spent so long asking questions, following breadcrumbs that led her down a rabbit hole of deception, and now, after everything, it all came down to this moment. "Why, Sarah?" Emily's voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried all the weight of the frustration, fear, and betrayal that had built up inside her over the past few weeks. "What was all of this for? Why did you pull me into this? Why did you lie to me?" Sarah's expression softened, just for a moment, but it quickly hardened again as she stepped forward, her gaze never wavering. "You really don't understand, do you?" Sarah's voice was cold, detached, as though the last remnants of the person Emily once knew were slipping away, leaving behind nothing but a stranger. "It was never about you, Emily. You were never meant to find out. You weren't supposed to get involved. But now that you have, it's too late." Emily felt her heart sink, the weight of those words heavy on her chest. Too late. She had already come so far, uncovered so much. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized how little she truly understood. Everything she thought she knew was unraveling before her eyes, like a tapestry being ripped apart at the seams. She had trusted Sarah, trusted Jack, but now she was realizing just how much of that trust had been a lie. "I don't believe you," Emily said, her voice firming as the anger began to build inside her. "I have to know the truth, Sarah. I need to know everything. Who's behind this? What's your role in all of it?" Sarah's eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or regret, but it was gone in an instant. "It doesn't matter now. You won't be able to stop it. No one can. It's already too far gone. The people pulling the strings, they're not just after you. They've been after everyone who stands in their way, and you're just the latest obstacle." She paused, as though trying to decide how much to reveal. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as Sarah continued. "You don't understand the scale of this, Emily. This isn't just about a few people. This isn't about some petty conspiracy. This is about power. Control. And now, you're caught in the middle." Emily's hands shook at her sides. The walls around her felt like they were closing in, the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on her chest. But she refused to back down. She had come too far to stop now. I'm not just going to stand here and let you walk away from this, Sarah. You owe me the truth. You owe me everything. For the first time, Sarah's composure slipped. Her eyes darted to the door, as though she were searching for an escape. Emily didn't let her move. No, she said, her voice low, steady. You're not going anywhere until I get the answers I need. You're going to tell me everything. There was a long, tense pause before Sarah's expression changed again, this time a hint of something like sadness creeping into her features. You're too late, she said quietly, almost regretfully. I never wanted this for you, Emily. But it's already done. There's nothing left to fix. Before Emily could respond, the door burst open, and Jack stepped into the room, his presence like a cold gust of wind sweeping in with him. His eyes locked onto Emily, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite place in his gaze. He wasn't the lost tourist she had once thought he was. He wasn't even the man she had helped, he was something much more dangerous. He had been playing his own game, just like Sarah. Let her go, Sarah, Jack said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable menace. This isn't her fight anymore. Emily's blood ran cold. What do you mean? She demanded, her pulse racing. This has always been my fight. You and Sarah have been using me, lying to me, and now you want me to just walk away. I'm not backing down, not now. Jack didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. You still don't understand, do you? This was never about you. This is about the bigger picture. The people who control everything. The ones who can make or break anyone with the flip of a coin. He paused, letting the words sink in, and Emily's stomach twisted as the realization hit her she was deeper in this than she ever imagined. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. This wasn't a group of people playing some petty game. This was about power on a level she couldn't even comprehend. The people behind all of this, the ones pulling the strings, were untouchable. You should have left when you had the chance, Jack continued, his voice low, almost apologetic. But now, you're part of something much bigger than you ever thought possible. You'll never get out of this, Emily. No one does. Sarah's voice cut through the air, sharp and full of finality. It's done. You're out of time. And then, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, the sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from the hallway. Emily turned just in time to see a figure step into the room. The man was tall, his face partially obscured by a hood, but Emily's heart dropped as she recognized him. It was one of the people who had been watching her, following her from the shadows. The same figure she had seen on multiple occasions, always lurking in the background, always one step ahead. But this time, the man wasn't hiding. He was stepping into the light, revealing himself as if to make a final declaration. And in his hand, he held something that made Emily's blood run cold, a flash drive. This isn't over, Emily, the man said, his voice cool and indifferent. You've been asking the wrong questions all along. But now, you've got the answer. The truth is right in front of you. Before Emily could even react, the man tossed the flash drive onto the table between them. Jack and Sarah's faces twisted with a mixture of shock and fear, and Emily's pulse raced as she reached for it. She was no longer sure who she could trust, but she knew one thing for certain, this was the key to everything. The moment her fingers touched the flash drive, the lights in the room flickered, and the walls seemed to close in. A voice echoed from the shadows, one that Emily had never heard before but somehow knew all too well. You've been played, Emily. You've all been played. And now, it's time to end this. And just like that, the room plunged into darkness. The silence that followed the flickering of the lights was suffocating. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the empty space where the man with the flash drive had been. She could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her, the betrayals, the lies, the secrets, all of it crashing down in a way that felt like too much to bear. Her hand still hovered over the flash drive, but she couldn't bring herself to pick it up. What would it even mean now? Was the truth really something she wanted to face after everything? But then, a part of her knew this was the only way forward. There were no more evasions, no more distractions. With trembling hands, she finally reached for the drive, sliding it into the computer that had been left on the table in front of her. The screen lit up almost instantly, and a folder appeared, labeled simply, "For Emily." Her breath caught in her throat as she clicked open the folder, her mind racing with anticipation and dread. The file inside wasn't just one piece of evidence. It was everything. Every single thread she had been chasing, every question she had asked, all neatly laid out before her like the final chapter of a book she'd never wanted to read. It was a revelation, yes, but it was also a confirmation of the one thing she'd feared the most. She had been caught in a web far more tangled than she could have imagined. Names, dates, connections, the evidence that Sarah, Jack, and the others were just pawns in a game far bigger than any of them. And there, buried at the very end of the file, was the shocking truth. The conspiracy was never just about them. It was always about her. She had been the key all along, the last missing piece that they needed. Her father, the man she had thought she'd lost to a tragic accident years ago, had been involved in something monumental. He had been part of a secret organization, a global network of power brokers, and the reason they had targeted Emily from the start wasn't just because of her involvement in the investigation. It was because of what she represented, the final link in a chain that had been set in motion long before she was even born. Her father had left behind more than just a legacy. He had left behind a blueprint, one that could unravel everything. And now, Emily had to decide whether to destroy it or carry it forward into an uncertain future. The weight of this realization hit her like a ton of bricks, and for a moment, everything went numb. The life she thought she had, the life she had been clawing to reclaim, was gone. In its place was a new reality, one that was murky, dangerous, and filled with people whose motives she could never fully trust. And yet, as the cold truth sank in, Emily knew that it wasn't over. There was still so much left unsaid, so much that still needed to be understood. The conspiracy hadn't just been about exposing the lies, it was about what would happen after. The organization her father had been part of still existed. The people who had been pulling the strings, manipulating everyone, they were still out there, still watching, still waiting. And they weren't just going to let Emily walk away. But the flash drive held another secret, one that was even more disorienting than the first. In the last few files, there was a message for Emily, a cryptic one that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. You can't undo what's been done, but you can decide where the story goes from here. There are still pieces left to move. It was a challenge, an invitation to play a game that she wasn't sure she was ready to take part in. But it was also a call to action, one that Emily couldn't ignore, not now. The final twist had arrived, and it had left her with a choice. She could walk away and leave the puzzle unsolved, live her life in the shadow of what had been, or she could dive back into the darkness, knowing that the consequences of doing so could be far more devastating than she could ever imagine. As she sat there, staring at the screen, Emily thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She thought about the friends she'd lost, the relationships that had been broken, the people who had been manipulated into playing their part in this grand scheme. And she thought about the people who were still out there, pulling the strings, watching from the shadows, waiting for the next move. Was it worth it? Was the truth worth the cost? Her mind raced, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of clarity, a realization that would shape the rest of her life. She wasn't just going to walk away from this. She wasn't going to let them win. The stakes were too high, the mystery too dangerous, and her father's legacy, whatever it was, needed to be faced head-on. Emily knew that the road ahead would be filled with even more challenges, more people she couldn't trust, and more sacrifices to be made. But she wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. As she shut the laptop with a decisive click, a strange sense of calm washed over her. The game had changed. And in that moment, Emily realized that this story, her story, was far from over. There were still pieces to find, still answers to uncover, and still threats waiting to rise from the shadows. The journey ahead would be darker, more complicated than she could have ever imagined. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she was ready for it. She stepped out of the room, the door closing behind her with a soft thud, and as she looked out into the night, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly be free from the web that had been spun around her. But one thing was certain, she had just stepped into a new chapter of her life. And whatever came next, she would face it head-on, determined to make her own choices, even if it meant walking into the unknown. And so, as the world moved on, as the conspiracy that had haunted her every step began to dissolve into the dark corners of history, Emily realized that the real mystery wasn't about the people behind the lies. It was about the choices she made moving forward. The truth had been revealed, but what mattered now was what she would do with it. And as the last flicker of light from the computer screen faded into darkness, she understood the game wasn't over. It had only just begun.